Hello and welcome to our latest Simplify podcast. Today we are going to be talking all about the consumer duty. I'm joined by Richard Sherwood and Dom House. Welcome both of you. Dom, just to start us off, can you give us a summary of what the consumer duty is? Just a bit of background around it.
Yeah, so thank you. So the consumer principle, it's been through a couple of consultation papers over the last year or so. It's effectively the FCA trying to beef up the treating customers fairly principles that have been in place for quite a while now. What they'd like to do is mandate firms to deliver good outcomes for retail customers. So that obviously goes a little bit beyond where treating customers fairly kind of stopped. And I think what the FCA are trying to do is take it a step further. So firms need to make sure that the actual outcomes that they deliver to retail customers are actually, firms are acting in their best interests. So they've come up with the consumer principle. They've also underscored it with some cross-cutting rules. So those are to act in good faith towards retail customers, avoid foreseeable harm to retail customers, and to enable and support retail customers to pursue their financial objectives. So I think it's quite an interesting development in the sense that the FCA are setting out that they want governance by principle. They want not to mandate certain rules. They want to make sure that firms are embedding this kind of behaviour within all of their interactions and their services that they deliver to retail customers. I think one of the interesting things as well is that they aren't providing kind of a reasonableness qualification to this. So they're not saying that firms just need to act in a reasonable manner. So what would they kind of expect to do in order to deliver this? They are saying that they must deliver good outcomes for retail customers. So the breadth of that and the consequences of that are going to be quite large within firms. The FCA have also said that they're looking at 4 outcomes to measure the success of the consumer principle against. So that would be products and services, price and value, consumer understanding, and consumer support. So it really goes across all parts of the interaction that firms have with customers, right from new business and sales all the way through to ensuring the service is maintained at the right level, that the products and services are still applicable to the customers, and that the customers understand and are paying a fair price for the services that they're being delivered. So there's a really interesting development from the FCA that they want to start looking at this consumer duty. In terms of timelines, so we've finished the second consultation now. That's generated a lot of debate within the industry about whether A, it's a good thing, and B, what are the consequences of this. We're expecting a policy statement towards the middle of this year, where it will then finalise in terms of the rules that the FCA are going to ask to be delivered. And we're expecting the delivery dates for the implementation of these rules to be end of April next year. So that's going to be quite a tight period for firms to understand these rules and come up with an approach and then implement it within their business. Especially considering it's going to not just be around, putting in X, Y, Z to deliver against these rules. It's going to be about looking at the culture, looking at all their services and taking that forward and making sure that they deliver against this principle.
Thanks, Dom. Yeah, so it sounds like there's absolutely loads that they need to do. So just to start off then, how can firms ensure suitability and appropriateness of its products and propositions for customers that have signed up and have invested with them? And how can they ensure that they're not going to cross over the advice line by, when they identify that customers aren't perhaps in the right products or services?
Yeah, so suitability and appropriateness, obviously that's been around for a few years now. Obviously MiFID rules and etc. have asked firms to deliver that. I guess one also to note is that the consumer principle will cover advice firms as well. So obviously the advisor firms are going to be able to look at this from that advice journey and that advice perspective. So suitability and appropriateness, absolutely, there's measures in place to ensure that that is done up front when a new product is being delivered to the customer. I think a really interesting development is to ensure that the suitability and appropriateness is going to continue going forward. So is the product that they took out 5-10 years ago still appropriate for that customer? Within an advice proposition, you'd expect that to be the case. But in a self-directed environment, there are some restrictions that firms have to ensure that they don't cross that advice line. And I think there's a little bit of a balancing act to take place here, where the FCA is saying, well, you must deliver good outcomes for customers, but equally you've got to stay within these boundaries. And if you look at the kind of wider context within the industry of new technology coming through, the amount of data and information that firms are holding and understand about their customers, actually it's just a question of whether we've got the balance right and whether those things need to change. So for example, in a self-directed proposition, a platform, for example, may know a lot about that customer and that their investments aren't necessarily correct for their demographic or whatever they've told about their their values and what they're trying to get out of the investment. At the moment, it's really difficult to wake them up to that fact without either scaring them or crossing that border into advice. And I think the industry needs to have a think about how best that kind of messaging and communication can take place with the customer, so that the information they're presented with is clear, they understand it, and they can take appropriate action, whilst also ensuring that the firm, or the platform in this instance, is not crossing over that boundary.
Because the customers' values and behaviours will change as well, won't they, over time? So it's sort of being able to identify that, as you've sort of mentioned.
Yeah, and values and behaviours is an interesting one, isn't it? Because we normally, it's easy to conflate values and etc. with things like ESG, which is obviously a big topic at the moment. Yeah. But it goes beyond that. So understanding a bit more about who the customer is, why are they investing, what are their personal objectives and their goals, and trying to link it back to that. So when you're communicating with the customer, understand who they are and what they want to achieve. I mean, if you look at kind of recent developments, market volatility as a result of the Ukraine crisis, for example, how do you tailor that communication to the customer so that you understand who they are and what their likely reaction is to market volatility? Because in most instances, it's better to definitely not panic and kind of come out of everything, or how do the platforms or the firms or the advisor communicate effectively with that customer so that they are helping them achieve the outcomes that the customer's outcomes that they want. We're kind of entering that new era of how do we tailor, how do we understand more about the customer? Because up until now we've been in a very much a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's probably not the best thing going forward.
No, absolutely is. Sorry, Rich, go.
I was going to say, I think that's really key, is understanding your customer here, because just because they're in a fund that might not be applicable for their demographic, as a industry, but that person might be well aware of that, and they might have chosen that on purpose. Therefore, they're not going to want notifications from their platform bugging them constantly to change fund, or to look at, or maybe this fund's better, or whatever avenue that firm decides to go down. You're going to have customers that are savvy, they're on self-directed for a reason. They don't want to be notified of all these changes and things, that they know what they're doing. And it's finding that balance of, it's catering for people that don't have that knowledge and maybe are just sort of amateurs in the space and are just set up a standard stocks and shares ISA, goes into a tracker fund or whatever the case might be. And you're going to have the people on the other side of that. Just because it's not an advised platform doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing. So it's finding that balance to really know your customer, so you don't send out needless communications or miss people that do need help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we, the generations that are coming through, this personalization that we've talked about, that's knowing your customer and what they want, predicting how they want to be treated and so on is sort of really key, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And to use a kind of another example of how to harness this technology as well in terms of kind of open finance, that's going to be quite interesting how that develops, because there's going to be the mechanism to learn so much more about the customer. Yeah. So, for example, are they holding a lot of cash? Is that going to be the appropriate thing for them? Obviously, the FCA have also announced that they'd like to get more people into investments out of large cash deposits that they may have built up, particularly as a result of the pandemic, where expenditure went down within retail customer, within their kind of in their lives. So how best can the industry target in the right way, target the customers to find them better products and services that meet their needs, without kind of going too far and kind of trying to, like you say, Rich, kind of identify customers that don't actually want any help. So it's going to be really interesting how these things develop.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. So what do firms need to do within their customer service functions, do you think, Rich, to sort of help to achieve these good customer outcomes?
That's a good question. So I think there's already a lot the market is doing to help customers get the outcome they want. I think the main challenge that I've definitely seen going into some businesses is it's not the new business side of things, it's the servicing of customers where people seem to be lacking. And that obviously can range from online journeys, telephone journeys, all that sort of stuff. It seems to be that sort of firms tend to lose focus once the new business is in, customer set up, they've had a really good journey through whatever method they choose. They then go into the BAU, if you will, of being a customer. But when they ring up or whatever the case might be, they seem to always be put on hold for a bit longer than maybe a new business case. It's not the same level of service they would have got as a new customer. So I think really focusing on the servicing of existing customers would really bring good outcomes to most of our customers, or most of the firm's customers, and really sort of draw that journey out, basically.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's Simplify, you both know, but we do a lot of work with, modeling processes and going in and doing process mapping. So I think there will be, a lot more sort of customer focused process design that's going to be needed here to ensure that, the customers really are the focus, and that those processes will be delivering those good customer outcomes. And it's not just efficiencies for the firm, if you like, but it's in the customer's best interest, the way that something's being done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reason why servicing is lacking currently is when you try to make a business case to improve a servicing journey, you can't really put it down to a monetary value. You can improve new business, get new customers in quicker, great, there's money there. Yeah. When you then go, right, I want to spend £1 million to improve my servicing journey, what's your benefit? There is no sort of monetary benefit directly from that anyway. Yeah. But having these new rules come in should sort of really help draw out that benefit for firms to understand that if they're aiming to get good customer outcomes, then they need to put the customer first in their journeys and not just facilitate things because they have to do it. They really want to sort of do right by the customer.
Yeah, and it's switching that emphasis, isn't it? So, you know, when we do a lot of process flow work, typically working with back office functions, making sure that the customer is really emphasized. So what is the customer journey here? What are they trying to achieve? Ultimately, the back office activities are just facilitating whatever the customer needs. So how do we better make sure that the customer is represented in process flow work, for example? You know, should we have more representation from propositions or a customer focused team to ensure that that is in there, and then culturally educating back office functions to ensure that they are not as inward looking, and that is a generalization, absolutely, but I think as an industry, wealth management tends to be quite inward looking, looking at, like you said, Rich, automation, efficiency savings. What does this system need to do to help the business do that? And that's all fine, that's all legitimate stuff, but we should absolutely understand what the customer's trying to do and how the changes fit in with delivering better outcomes for customers. And I think that's going to be, I think it's going to be a really rewarding thing to start looking at, but I think it is quite a tough thing to ensure that when you're going through those, the workshops and putting sticky notes on the walls, etc., that the customer is in the front of everyone's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's obviously lots that the firm needs to do here to sort of remain compliant. So what would be the key areas, do you think, Dom, of the attention that firms need to provide to make sure that they are remaining compliant and having that right oversight?
Yeah, I think firms are going to have to do a bit of thinking here. I think the easy answer is they're going to have to beef up their compliance and oversight. I think that's kind of a given. I think that kind of role is going to have to expand into more areas than it traditionally looks at. I appreciate that it looks at all areas, but in a bit more detail around the levels of service that are being provided and how it can deliver good customer outcomes. I think one of the first and maybe biggest challenges with Consumer Duty is firms are going to have to decide how they're going to measure success, because the FCA aren't going to turn around and say, here's the the 10 things that you need to measure in order to demonstrate that you've delivered good customer outcomes. Firms are going to have to work that out, and obviously there'll be some kind of industry conversations around that. But whether that's measuring complaints, measuring SLAs and KPIs, how are they going to take that forward and then obviously implement that so that when there's in the right committees and forums and reporting and dashboards and all the rest of it, there is a key customer lens on these things. So it's not just, yeah, we're at 95% SLA, that's great, that's our target, that's what we do. Well, okay, is 95% the right measure for the customer? Are we looking at the right parts of the process and measuring from a customer perspective whether we're delivering their outcomes? Because we all know that within the overall customer journey there is a lot of bits and pieces that take time, that need to be done, but ultimately how is the customer being measured against that?
Yeah, I think that's sort of really interesting, the way this is going to be measured. Personally, I would like to see the FCA sort of volunteer some ways that this should be measured. Maybe not make that the rule, but I think having that sort of structure would help firms all reach the same goal. Leaving it down to the firm and then not telling them it's wrong until the FCA come in to assess them for whatever reason is not, in itself is not great for customer service. You want that feedback quicker to say, like, yeah, we're not meeting what we're expected to do here. But without some sort of structure on that, you wouldn't know until you've basically been fined by the FCA to say you did it wrong.
I mean, that's okay up to a certain point, isn't it, Rich? But I think you've got to remember how different firms are in terms of not only their product proposition and what they offer to to their customers, but also the methods that they do that. So a firm that's still largely paper or phone based in terms of their interactions with their customers is going to be very different from a digital first, app based proposition. So they're going to need to measure things in different ways. I think hopefully this is another driver towards more digitization, open up more channels to customers, because there's a direct correlation between good outcomes and the customers being able to interact in more ways, or in the way that they choose with the firm and their product that they've taken out. So hopefully that'll be a good point, but I think there will need to be a level of bespokeness to how firms approach that.
Yeah, I agree. It should definitely not be like, you have 10 days to reply, because you received this notification, whatever the case might be. Definitely not that sort of structure, but just the expectation to report on that metric to a certain extent. Not to say, like, your benchmark has got to be this. The benchmark can be set by the firm, relevant to their business model they've got. I think that's fine. But at the moment, there's, if these rules are published today, there's no rule to say, well, you have to publish this metric. You have to make this available to us so we can assess you. And I think that's where this might this might be found sort of wanting in that sense. Like, you're going to get an inconsistent approach across the industry of how people are going to tackle this, because once again, it's all down to interpretation.
Yeah, sort of having a bit of framework is what you're saying, isn't it? Almost,
yeah,
for people to sort of follow if they need to, or stay within those boundaries almost.
I guess the one thing that we haven't covered as much is in terms of that communication with the customer. So, okay, yeah, we've also discussed the channels, but in terms of giving the customer the information that they need in the right format is also something that's going to be big on the agenda to kind of cover consumer duty. I think there's a lot of communications that happen now which are, again, I'm going to use the word kind of inward looking, but they serve a purpose to the firm. They're not always written or presented in the best way for retail customers, and it kind of links back to understanding who the customer is and what their goals and objectives are going to be. But we've got to a point where things like regular statements are in a pretty standardized format within the industry, but I think firms as a whole, they need to listen a bit more to customers and maybe to advisors who are closer to the customer and understand them in a bit more detail, to try and work out how to present that information in a way that's better understood by the customer, and that may be some level of tailoring of communications to different customer groups, whilst also trying to keep the automation that has been built up over the last few years.
Yeah, I think client communications are just like documents are churned out, aren't they? But I think there needs to be a lot more, especially going forward, sort of as I mentioned, like the generations coming through. Firms need to adapt to those new generations as well. Like, I know we're talking about consumer duty, but it people don't just want documents just sent to them. People don't read them. If you want the customers to actually read what's being sent, and they need to adapt the approach, like you've said, about using different channels. Customers want two-way communications. They want to initiate communication sometimes as well. So it's like thinking about those elements too.
Yeah, I mean, that dialogue is really interesting, isn't it? To think about kind of customers interacting with their investments and their accounts in more meaningful ways to them.
Yeah.
Rather than it just being a one-way communication from the firm to the customer.
Yeah, and I think Jane's point on initiating that conversation as well, as if a client does want to get in contact or whatever, it really is understanding that customer's needs and how they want to get in contact. because younger generations aren't going to want to write a letter or call up even. That they want an online approach, and probably they don't want to go to they don't want to go to a special app that's written by that company. They want to go to Facebook, or they want to go to WhatsApp or whatever and send a message via that.
Yeah.
And the options are there to do that. I think the industry just needs to sort of catch up to a certain extent. The security needs from that point of view can be applied to all those social media platforms. It's just integrating that into the market, really, into the firms.
Yeah, and it's a sense that, again, wealth is perhaps not looking outside the industry for how it's being done elsewhere and trying to adopt practices from elsewhere. Because I think that would go a whole leap towards delivering better services to customers.
So along that sort of note, outside of the sector, but quite recently we had a power cut in our area, so I went online, went to report it, and it actually took me to a WhatsApp group that the power company's got set up. It knows it's you because it's got your phone number. You report it via WhatsApp, and they give you updates via WhatsApp. I haven't got to go to like a special website to read updates or whatever. So it's just, and that surprised me as a user. I've never had to do it before. I wasn't expecting this energy company to have a WhatsApp channel, but it was nice to be there, and it did sort of fit into what I use daily. So it is tapping into those things that people are used to, and arguably they'd read it more if it was via WhatsApp or whatever the case might be. So it really is sort of getting that message across.
Well, what a really interesting discussion. Thank you both for your time today. I hope everyone listening enjoyed it, and thank you for listening along. If you'd like to get in touch or you'd like some more information, you can get in touch with any of us through LinkedIn, or you can visit our website at simplifyconsulting.co.uk. Thank you.